Okay, cool. Good morning, guys. My name is Mariah Black Bird-Perry. I am a Policy Partnership Specialist with the Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs at Interior. And I would like to welcome you all to Exploring Opportunities with Tribes and Indigenous Peoples. It's a very awesome panel set up. First, I will introduce my panel. We have Travis Heyman, President of Westervelt Ecological Services. We have Danella Miller, Fishery Science Manager of Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, and Justice Rhodes, Ecosystem Restoration Coordinator for the Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs at Interior. Carl Jansen, Deputy for Programs and Project Management at St. Paul District for U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. We have Delane Atsidy, the Executive Director of Indian Nations Conservation Alliance. And last but not least, Maria Wiseman, Senior Policy Counselor for the Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs at Interior. So, welcome again. Good morning. I'm happy to see all of you here bright and early. And invite you to ask questions of our panelists and be open-minded and creative. We will reserve questions for the end, and if you can wait for the microphone to get to you, just because it's a live stream session, we would like our online audience to hear the questions as well. This is my third year at this conference. It was formerly National Ecological Markets and Banking Conference, and then National Mitigation Ecological Markets Conference, and now it's just Environmental Markets Conference, and it's been so exciting to see it grow and so many people come and the panelists grow as well. In previous years, we've had different versions of this exploring opportunities with indigenous nations, tribal peoples, and compensatory mitigations, all in an effort to bring light to the role that tribes should, can, and do play in environmental markets and environmental restoration as a whole. We've heard about regulations in the past years and policy changes that are necessary to heighten tribal inclusion in environmental markets, particularly the importance and needs for honoring tribal sovereignty in water and wetlands, species, and carbon. We've learned about specific examples of tribal compensatory mitigation banks, notably Lumi Nation in Umpqua Creek, Shoalwater Bay, their challenges, their successes, their failures, what needs to change, and how they assert their tribal sovereignty. We've also seen official inclusion of tribes and tribal lands in federal policy recently. Congratulations to Fish and Wildlife Service for leading the way on that. A win is a win. And along the way, we've learned a lot. And I invite you to buckle up today because we are going to learn even more. This year, we are doing something a little different. We have a very specific set of talent up here today to highlight and explore opportunities with tribal nations and indigenous peoples as a whole in the environmental sphere. This year, we expand beyond compensatory mitigation specifically and talk about, by talking to tribal representatives, whether it's from their tribal perspective as a tribal organization in compensatory mitigation. We also have champions of Indian law up here, champions of successfully working with tribes in ecological restoration, and federal champions. We've highlighted in the past, compensatory mitigation in environmental markets is never, it's hard for tribes to navigate the policy and the regulations. It can be hairy and it takes 2-3 times as long for tribes to do in a lot of part tribes not only having to teach, but assert their tribal sovereignty in the sphere. There are several considerations that come into play as well as enforcement, funding, capacity, planning. The challenges and successes are specific to individual tribes, and there is no one-size-fits-all approach to tribes in anything for environmental. I'd like to point out that even though compensatory mitigation is newer, tribal ecosystem restoration is not new. Tribes participate in a very wide variety of restoration on their own terms in the spaces of compensatory mitigation, species restoration, ecological, and environmental restoration. Tribes are the original stewards of the land, and since time immemorial, have an immeasurable amount of indigenous knowledge to experience in time. There are also a few notable federal initiatives that support tribally led conservation restoration initiatives to combat climate change. Notably, the America the Beautiful Challenge, 9 Keystone Initiatives, as well as historic investments in Indian country. A lot of those will be talked about later. A few areas we are going to highlight today is tribal sovereignty, partnerships, engagement, among many others. Our hope is to spark curiosity and interest how tribes and Indigenous peoples can play a bigger role in this sphere, on how tribes can partner with you all here today and work together to achieve the same goal, even if perspectives from tribes to environmental organizations is different. As we get started, I'm going to ask each of our panelists as you speak to introduce a little bit about yourself and what exactly it is you do. I know we breezed over introductions in light of time. I'm also noting that each panelist will be available after this panel to continue discussions in the lobby, as I hope there are many questions to come. Again, thank you guys for being here. I know it's early. I really appreciate it. So let's start off. Our first question on this panel, I'm going to turn it over to our federal people, Maria, Carl, and Justice, to talk about some of the foundations of environmental initiatives and federal policy. So can we talk about that?
Thank you. Thanks, Mariah. Really pleased to be here today. I've never been to this conference, and I'm really finding it very interesting from a federal perspective to interact with some folks who I don't normally interact with. Some of the things that I want to talk about involve environmental initiatives that this administration is putting forth. And as Mariah said, I'm the Senior Policy Advisor to the Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs for Climate and the Environment. And I'm really fortunate to find myself in this position after 30 years in the department in a variety of capacities, from park ranger to solicitor to director of the Indian Gaming Office. So I've been all over in natural resources in Indian affairs. But I think this position that I'm in now really takes advantage of the time that we find ourselves in with this administration. There's a big climate agenda. There's a recognition that we need to uphold our trust responsibility to tribes. And we have Secretary Holland, who is our first Indigenous secretary. And so we're really trying to take advantage of this time to really put forth a lot of initiatives. And the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act have really put a lot of dollars into the system for us to really drive some significant initiatives. So I'm just going to talk about a couple of those. And I think in these initiatives, there is room for the private sector. There is room for philanthropy to become involved, because I think these require a bigger group of folks who are able to make these a reality. So first, Secretary Holland issued 5 climate policies at the Department of the Interior, and these really direct federal employees at the department to take climate into account in everything that we do. And to plan for climate change and really trying to address those climate change impacts that are coming. Another one is the Secretary issued a new Indigenous Knowledge policy, one in which I worked on, which really calls for DOI employees to elevate Indigenous knowledge in their decision-making and their scientific research. And this really follows on the White House initiative that came out about 2 years ago. So this is really, I think this is a really great initiative, because when we include Indigenous knowledge in our decision-making, in our scientific research, we really are able to come out with a better, more holistic set of decisions. It's like, you braid the two decisions together like sweetgrass. Folks are familiar with that book, Braiding Sweetgrass, to create a much stronger outcome. Another thing that the department has done is taken $72 million to electrify tribal homes with clean energy. This is a significant initiative because many tribal homes don't have electricity. So this is a big deal. Also, $120 million for the annual Tribal Climate Resilience Awards that really address climate threats to tribes. So, and this is up from $45 million last year. That reflects the inclusion of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, money, it's bill, and the Inflation Reduction Act funding, which is IRA. And it's going to support 102 tribes and 9 tribal organizations to strengthen their preparedness. And another project that I've been involved in is $115 million for the Voluntary Community-Driven Relocation Initiative to relocate core infrastructure for 11 tribes that are facing severe climate impacts. And so these initiatives are really developed with the awareness that tribes really know what's best for them. They're able to direct development that meets their unique needs, and we as a federal government are going to support those needs and plans with dollars and with technical assistance. So I'm gonna leave it there, and folks can chime in with their initiatives.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Justice Rhodes. I am an enrolled Cowlitz from Southwest Washington State. If you're familiar with, to give you a geographic location, if you're familiar with Mount St. Helens, we call her Lawilatla. That's our volcano. So this is one of my distant cousins right here. So she's Yakima. She's on the other side of the volcano, but that's ours. I do ecosystem restoration for the Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs. I'm very fortunate to be in this position, and it's a new position for the Assistant Secretary. My background is in sustainable development, international and Indian law, and environmental issues across the board, border to border, coast to coast. I've worked in Indian country for decades now as a tribal leader and as a different various aspects of federal and private industry. So that's a little bit about me and where I come from. What I'm going to be talking about a little bit here, and I'm kind of in a precarious situation to use my pointer, but I'm going to try here. If you don't mind, I'm going to stand up. Don't anybody get nervous. What I'm going to talk about here is Keystone Initiatives. The Keystone Initiatives are part of the Interior's push to support geographic areas across the United States and different areas of ecosystem restoration. This simple map here shows the 9 Keystone Initiatives that Mariah had mentioned just a moment ago. I'm just going to start from the East Coast and move west. You'll see the Salt Marsh Keystone Initiative. That's pretty self-explanatory, protecting our coast. You'll see the Appalachia. And before I move on, in Indian country, there's multiple tribes in the Northeast that are concerned about offshore wind, concerned about the degradation of the oceans with the development of offshore wind, migratory fish, and other species. So there's concerns for ecosystem restoration with tribes, with the Keystone Initiative, and there's funding available for tribes to support their interests, if you will. Moving across into the Appalachia, there are a few tribes that are concerned here. Mostly recreation is involved in the Appalachia region, but it's improving quality of life. I want to get to the heartland here, the core of the United States, the grasslands here in the central United States. And the next slide, and we were not moving to it yet, but you'll see that it moves into Canada and Mexico because the grasslands, they don't recognize borders. Moving further west, we talk about the sagebrush Keystone Initiative. A lot of you might be familiar with the sage grouse and what's going on with those initiatives in that part of the country. Again, moving west to the Klamath River Basin, a lot of support with salmon restoration with some of the tribes in Northern California and Southern Oregon. Into off-coast, we see the native island biodiversity, the saving Hawaiian forest birds, which is truly a heart-wrenching story. If you've listened to some of the presenters here this week and other presenters on what's going on with native birds in the Hawaiian Islands, it's a very sad situation, and Native Hawaiians are very much involved in trying to support Native Hawaiian birds. Gravel to Gravel is a huge initiative, Keystone Initiative, essentially salmon restoration into the wetlands, and tributaries. The Gravel to Gravel is very much Indian-led. And what I'm going to and then the other two on the bottom, the other two Keystone Initiatives, you'll see the seeds, deploying national seed strategy, and invasive species, early detection, rapid response. These are the 9 Keystone Initiatives within the interior that we're focusing on. It gives you an idea geographically what's going on within each one of these Keystone Initiatives. Next slide, please. Within Indian country, because that's the focus of this discussion here, I want to show a little bit about what's going on in the grasslands. So I'm going to narrow this down a little bit and just talk about the Grasslands Keystone Initiative moving forward here. You'll see there's roughly, you can count them if you'd like, but I think there's 45 tribes there within the grasslands. And what this shows you is just how much involvement the tribes have within the central grasslands. For those of you that don't know, there's 574 federally recognized tribes in the United States. Roughly 225 are in Alaska. Roughly 375 are in the lower 48. If you want to calculate it out a little bit more, California has just over 100 tribes. Washington State has about 30 tribes. Oklahoma about 40. And then some of the other states that you might know of, the Dakotas, about 10 each, Montana, 10, just to give you an idea of how many tribes we're talking about geographically within the United States. This map just shows you the grassland biome. Next slide, please. What this shows you is the extended grassland biome and how it reaches into Canada and down into Mexico. What it also shows you, and you can't really see it on the exterior part of the slide, is that of those 45 tribes you saw on the previous slide, there are 80 tribal entities. So that would be consortia, that would be tribes working together, that would be some of the nonprofits or some of the organizations that some of the tribes have put together. So what I'm getting at there is there's roughly 80 organizations that work internationally, and this doesn't include the Canadian and Mexican organizations, but in the United States, there's roughly 80 organizations and tribes that you can work with. And that's part of, I think, what we want to discuss here today is how many tribes are out there and how do you work with them and what are they doing? What are they doing with seeds? What are they doing with the birds, bees, butterflies, the pollinators, the bison? What's going on there? And I'll take a rest here and we can talk a little bit more about some of the details later. Thank you for sharing the slides.
All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Carl Jansen. I am with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers out of the St. Paul District in Minnesota. I'm coming to you with a perspective of a previous military member. So prior to being the civilian in the St. Paul District, I was also the commander of the St. Paul District and the Buffalo District while I was in the Army. And during that time frame, I had the opportunity to engage in tribal consultation in multiple areas of the country. And my experience with that is both probably some of the most challenging experiences of my military career, but also some of the most gratifying. So today, so the Army Corps of Engineers, I'm at the local level, at the district level. The headquarters of the Army Corps is in Washington, D.C. There are 9 regional headquarters across the country and 43 individual districts, mostly arranged around watershed boundaries. The St. Paul District, as you saw on Justice's map, is in some of the more colorful areas that he displayed because our cultural geography in the district is co-located with 25 federally recognized tribes and about 54 with ancestral ties to the area that we serve. There are 3 areas that I'd like to highlight for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The first is our tribal consultation policy. Our policy was updated in December of last year, driven by the senior leaders who oversee the Army Corps' Civil Works program, the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Civil Works. Sometimes when you think of policies, you think of a burden, right? This is something we have to follow. In the St. Paul District, and I think broadly across the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, we view this as a passport. A passport can take you to places you've never been before, to experiences you've never had before, and opens up new horizons for you. And that's exactly what we're experiencing with our new tribal consultation policy. It's all about the foundation of meeting our trust responsibility and supporting tribes in self-governance and self-determination, driven to identify opportunities that we can pursue with the tools we have available to benefit tribal governance. And so a couple of examples of that. One is co-management. It's a key drive within the Army Corps of Engineers. I mentioned that our geography of our Civil Works program is co-located with our cultural geography. Many times our project sites, for example, reservoirs or recreation areas, are adjacent or even within a tribal reservation. For example, in the St. Paul district, a federal dam that we have that provides flood risk management downstream is located within the closed reservation of the Red Lake Nation of Chippewa Indians. By pursuing a co-management approach, we're able to get win-wins. We are able to benefit from the stewardship that the tribe brings to those natural resources, and at the same time, we're able to deliver on the authorized purpose of that structure. And then the third and last point I'll touch on is our tribal partnership program. So the Army Corps' Civil Works program, we operate under many authorities given to us by Congress. I think of these authorities like tools in a toolbox, like a big red toolbox you have in your garage. The Tribal Partnership Program, this is a special tool. When you open up the big drawer at the bottom of the toolbox, there's a very interesting tool that's there, and it's unlike any other that we have in the Corps. This one is hand-tailored to working with tribes for a very broad range of water resource issues. We're able to partner with tribes, have very flexible financial cost-sharing arrangements, often waiverable. And in the St. Paul district alone, we're engaging in projects such as groundwater investigation, wetland restoration, fish passage at dams, dam removals in other areas. I think when you think of a strategy being the alignment of ends, ways, and means, our tribal consultation policy outlines the ends. This tribal partnership program outlines the ways and the means that we're able to do that. So just a couple highlights from the Army Corps, and I'm sure we'll talk about a few others later.
Thank you, Maria, Justice, and Carl, for offering your perspective and showcasing the federal support for tribes in the environmental sphere. I'd like to now turn it to Danila and Delane about a deeper dive into the tribal perspectives and their experience. Danila, specifically, we've spoke about the importance of there being no separation between tribes and developers. Can you elaborate on that and what that means? And for Delane, can you highlight what ecosystem services means to tribal producers and how it adds value to tribal projects? So I'll turn it to you, Danila.
All right, thank you, and good morning, everyone. I'm glad to be here with you all. My name is Danila Miller. I'm the Fisheries Science Manager for the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, and I'm also an enrolled member of the Yakima Nation, which is one of the 4 tribes that our consortia represents. We represent the Yakima, the Umatilla, Warm Springs, and Nez Perce tribes, all within the Columbia River Basin. And I worked for many years for my tribe in our fisheries department, and I just recently switched over to Intertribe just over a year ago, also referred to as CRITFIC. And what I saw as the benefit in doing so is being able to do our fisheries restoration at a larger scale, at the basin-wide scale, the Columbia River Basin. Between the 4 tribes, our treaty territories encompass about 1/3 of the Columbia River Basin, and we also oversee about 50% of the existing salmon-bearing streams within the basin as well. And our work really entails salmon being a keystone species, like Justice talked about the buffalo, you could interchange every aspect that, in our conversations, salmon with buffalo, really being keystone species to the environment and health of the ecosystem, because salmon provide those nutrients, to the headwaters, so it's from the estuary to the headwaters. And as he mentioned, gravel to gravel management that we see, and we're focusing on at a large scale. And getting back to the question, was that there really should be no separation between tribes and developers, meaning that, there's a lot of tribal land, even though it may not be within the boundaries of the reservation, but we have, our historical treaty areas, which is throughout North America. You can't step foot somewhere that there wasn't a tribe that historically lived there. And so that's what we, tribes shouldn't be just a box that needs to be checked for consultation or cultural clearance or things like that. Us as sovereigns, co-managers, and we're not just stakeholders, we're not just an interested party, but us being involved in those processes with a seat at the table. And like I said, not just a box that needs to be checked. So that's kind of our level of engagement that we work to maintain, and like being involved in processes early on at the decision-making process, and not just a reviewer or consulting or providing input to a project or development or anything after it's already been kind of set in stone. So, thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Delane Atsedy. I'm the Executive Director for Indian Nations Conservation Alliance. We're located in Taos, New Mexico. And the organization that I represent, we work with tribes at more of the grassroots level, working with tribal natural resource level users. And then, most of their focus is on food sovereignty. After COVID, they've been focusing more on their own food sovereignty, and then also their water rights usage, utilizing their water rights. And then another big concern is their youth, who's going to take over management in the future. And then also converting their what would be usually their commodity product into more value added, and then now incentive driven practices. Some of the big projects that we got accomplished is that we started the Indigenous Grazing Land Coalition, and we had one of our first meetings last week in Albuquerque, and it was pretty successful. We teamed up with the Nature Conservancy, Holistic Management International, National Grazing Lands Coalition, and some other organizations to get this done. And then we also started the Inca trading app, and that's to mimic the tribes. It's the modern version of tribes trading within each other like they used to a long time ago. So anything that's natural resource related, they can trade with each other, and they can also. It's not not using currency, just a trade like it was at one time. And then we also got a tribal youth course started, working on natural resource projects, hiring tribal youth within their tribe to work on these projects. And then we also got the first virtual fence project done on tribal land, and we're in our 2.5 years into it, and it's going pretty well. So what we do is we help set the foundation for them to build upon. We set the conservation projects, and we get funding for it and work with the tribes at that level. And then it's up to them to start to build upon it, add value to their commodity product, and, use some of these new environmental markets to build upon incentives to create value. And just to give you a little more perspective, one of the bigger tribes in the Southwest, the average mean income for them is $11,000 a year per tribal member, and unemployment 60 to 70%. So, that guides a lot of decision making. Just having, they're not going to invest in some of these expensive processes, and they really need allies, and basically they need a big brother, to help. This is how this is done, kind of guidance. But you know, we're focusing right now on what usually is the question was, you know, how are they using this? So we focus mostly on livestock for now because that's one of the biggest products coming out of tribal lands, the 50+ million acres of tribal rangeland. You know, they grow a lot of livestock, so we're focusing on that. Usually the usual business models for them to sell to the border towns, and then the border town buyers make the money off of that product. We're literally, when we don't make, this is what I tell them, is when we don't make a profit on our commodity product, we're giving our resources away for free, you know, from one nation to another nation. And, you know, you guys do what you can with it because we didn't. And so that's what we're focusing on right now. We're doing value-added processes with them, you know, taking them to the next level. But with this environmental market, you know, it can take them to the next level in you know, earning something. So, thank you.
Thank you, Delane. Speaking of Big Brother and having those kind of partnerships, I'd like to turn it over to Travis Heyman. I know he's done a lot of work and brings a unique insight in talking about partnerships with this space. So Travis, enlighten us.
Yeah, enlighten you guys. Yeah, morning, everybody. Yeah, I'm Travis Heyman. I'm the president of Westervelt Ecological Services. We're part of a much bigger company. It's a timber company in Alabama. And they've been around 140 years, so they understand long-term sort of stewardship, ownership, what it means to be stewards of the land. And they've kind of brought that ethic to us at Westervelt Ecological when we started about 17 years ago. So I think this is, like, by the way, my 17th or 18th year at this conference. And one of the things that I've seen huge growth in is the concept of long-term stewardship, which is really, I'm really proud of that for the industry. When I first came here, or even maybe 12 years ago, I heard bankers complain about in perpetuity being like 10 years. I was like, well, no, in perpetuity is longer than 10 years. So how do you think way beyond 10 years? Because they're thinking of performance, right, ecological performance. And so I was like, in perpetuity, we have to think about when you're gone, or if you're gone, what happens to these landscapes? So that's when you start hearing the conversations about endowments and funding. Well, then there's an aspect of management. So who's actually going to take care of all of these resources when we're really done? So then I had a conversation, again, it's all about good conversations, but I had a conversation at a conference several years ago. And someone said to me, hey, some tribes want to do banking, Travis. And I said, no one wants to do banking. It's terrible, especially not tribes. Banking is a tough, technical, regulatory, it's awful. I don't want to do banking. And so we got to talking more, and they said, well, it's really about access. Okay, well, how do you get, oh, that's different than banking for sure. So I, as a landowner, we as a landowner, let's give access. Let's look at what access looks like. Let's have a conversation. And the concept, and by the way, I wanted to give credit to the core Tribal Nations Tech Center. There's gentlemen there, a couple of them that really helped me. And it's interesting, when I started to have these conversations about reconnecting people with land, you get emotional. Because, excuse me, it is emotional to think about having the right individuals reconnecting with landscapes, because you're doing the right thing. And then you feel like you're doing something bigger than restoration. So anyway, so we've thought about, okay, let's reconnect the right people, have the right conversations. And oh, by the way, someone mentioned, I think you did, not 106 conversations. We have to do that. But why don't have it way early than 106? Let's have a piece of land that we're talking about and then invite the individuals that understand long-term land stewardship and management. And then we learn from them and we listen. And we've had some amazing conversations, emotional conversations about history, their experience. And those are the workshops and the listening. I haven't cried in a 106 consultation, but I have cried in workshops. So we held 2 workshops. One was on river cane in the South, and to hear the Choctaw Nation talk about river cane, that was amazing to me. So we completed the largest river cane restoration project in the South last year, or just this year, actually. And so I can give you information about that. But we brought river cane back to the Tuckabum site, which was really important to the Choctaw. And the Corps of Engineers supported that effort. I really appreciated it. We didn't have to do it, but it was the right thing to do. And now we're providing then access to the Choctaw for river cane collections. In the West, we're looking at Tule workshops, really important for us as well. We have a lot of Tules on our properties, and there are tribes out there very interested in collecting Tules. A part of their culture, it's a part of their tribe, it's a part of their history. So we're giving them access. And then we've talked about access and listening, and then is there other ways that they want to support this restoration project? Is it monitoring? We can pay for monitoring. Do they want paid for monitoring? How can they help us with monitoring? Can we explain to them what we need to do for monitoring? Are they interested in that aspect of our process? Is there transfer? That is kind of the ultimate. Is the tribe, or are the tribes interested in actual land transfer of some of these assets? And we haven't done that yet, but we've talked about that could be the end result if it works for them, if it's not a liability and it's important to them and their tribes. We would consider a transfer of property. So, I mean, I think about all the policy, and it's really exciting, but I'm in the weeds and I'm on the ground, and I'm seeing some really great connections on just a concept that we had at the conference maybe a couple years ago. Now it's turned into this panel, but I'm super excited that now tribal relations and connections is a part of Westerfeld Ecological's processes throughout our projects. When we even begin to think about a project, we start thinking about how do we connect with potentially interested tribes to start the conversation and start listening, because that's the important thing. Anyway, sorry about getting emotional. It's pretty early in the morning.
Thank you, Travis. Always love to hear it and love to hear the stories about doing co-stewardship and co-management essentially before Secretary Order 3404 came out and federal trust responsibility to co-stewardship to tribes. I'd also like to invite our other panelists on thoughts that they have about partnerships and partnering tribe to tribe, federal to federal, or tribal to non-tribal entity, and particularly talking about any insight that they have on the details or what can be recommended. I know Justice would have some thoughts.
Dare. Okay, I'll try and be efficient. This is such a fantastic panel. Such great words. Thank you so much for everybody so far and what you've been able to share in the opening. And there's just so much to talk about. But I want to just parlay off of what Travis was mentioning a little bit and talk about the communication with tribes. What I hope that you would come away from this panel in remembering is that, you know, this country was you know, United States, Canada, the Americas was and still is, but was Indian country. It was all Indian country, and so wherever you are, you're on Indian land. And the stewards of that land were here for thousands of years, you know, doing a good job, doing just fine, right? And so, if there's anything you leave this panel with, it's what tribe is in this area? What tribe should I be working with? Whatever your project is, whether it's, you know, seeds, pollinators, whether it's flora, fauna, wherever it is, reach out to that tribe and find out which tribes are in that area and talk to them first. Put together a letter for the tribal council. You know, stop by and understand where you are. My background when I'm on the Teams meetings, you know, we all are on Teams meetings or G Meets or Zoom every day, all day, it seems like now, is a background of the United States that shows an overlay of all the different areas of Indian country and how they were overlaid across the United States and Canada and Mexico. So I think if there's anything you come away from here, it's to communicate with the tribes with your project, because they might have a youth which has been, you know, somebody that wants to take this on for the next generation, and they have some subject matter experts, some brilliant minds. If it's not one of their youth, it might be one of their elders. We talked about Indigenous Knowledge. It's part of the department's progression towards using Indigenous Knowledge, IK, if you will, in decision making with ecosystem projects. consider that first. I would like for that to be your first thought, not an afterthought. I'll stop there.
Yeah, and I'll add on to that. You know, this came up when we were doing the Indigenous Knowledge Handbook and the departmental manual chapter. Now that it's a requirement for every federal employee to include Indigenous knowledge in their work, immediately there were questions, well, how do we do that, right? What does that mean? You know, if people are paralyzed because they don't want to do it wrong. And one thing that we've really tried to do in the policy and now the forthcoming handbook is kind of lay out some of the elements of what it means to engage with a tribe on these kinds of issues. You know, and one of the things is, you know, early tribal engagement. So, and this would apply to the private sector. I mean, you should establish a relationship built on trust, reciprocity, transparency long before you want to engage about a specific project, right? So there are some, in the handbook, there's some thoughts about how to do that. You know, what does that mean to engage early? Another thing is to obtain free, prior, and informed consent to receive and include Indigenous knowledge, right? What does that mean? What does that look like? This is really new to some folks, so there's some guidance about that. And one of the biggest issues is data sovereignty. So once you've received information from a tribe, how do you protect it? From the federal government side, statutes, open data statutes like FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, don't allow us to protect that data. It's releasable to the public, right? So what does that mean? Means you're very careful in what you receive. You receive it with free, prior, and informed consent. You know, it's about things like disclosing sacred sites or having, for example, important plants, you know, exploited for commercial purposes, which the tribe receives no benefit, right? So, I mean, I think if you're looking for some kind of guidance about how to do this, if this is new to you, I would check out the departmental manual chapter, and I can quote you the sites 301 DM7, right? Go to the DOI website, and then look for the handbook that's coming out. We're, you know, narrow down some of these concepts, and also the federal guidance, right? So these are some of the very first steps that you want to think about when you're going to engage a tribe.
I was just real quick, I was going to mention we had a success story where I feel like, you know, when we put together documents, we have long-term management plans. So there's a written document that's, I call it the babysitting manual for the property. But we had tribes share with us information they wanted to include in our management plan and actually document, which is actually, they said not common, but they cared so much about the things and access and ceremonies that they would like to have access for this site, and they wanted to put it in our management plan. That was really special for them to share that.
I know, you know, I'm a big supporter of tribes working together and building these alliances, and also building these coalitions and learning from each other and comparing notes, what works, what doesn't work. And, you know, the biggest asset that we try to focus is on the youth, but also the elders. You know, they contain our oral history of how things were done. So, you know, they'd be a good idea to consult with a lot of, you know, do some scoping sessions with tribal elders just to get that information, because sometimes you're not going to get it working with departments or some other areas.
I'll just add a little bit of different perspective on this as well. And Donella mentioned, I think, you know, partnering is different than treating somebody as a stakeholder. There is a distinct difference in those terms, and I think it is worth thinking deeply about what partnership means and the power that each partner has in the decision-making process that should begin from the very beginning. Our district, the St. Paul District, along with several others, are involved with transboundary watersheds on the United States and Canada border. Those watersheds, those binational watersheds, are overseen by the two countries, United States and Canada, through the Boundary Waters Treaty of 1909 with the International Joint Commission. Corps of Engineer district leaders also have appointed roles on the boards that the IJC establishes for these watersheds. The cultural background, the indigenous peoples of those areas didn't have a vote in setting up those borders. Those are political boundaries that are recent, right? They don't span thousands of years. The people of the Anishinaabe span both sides of the border. The IJC, I think, are leaders in our society of including indigenous knowledge and how they are moving to be inclusive of indigenous people at the decision-making level on these national government level boards. And a couple examples is membership. So the IJC has taken measures over the past several years to ensure that people of indigenous backgrounds are members on these watershed boards. And with that membership, it's able to tap into the broader network of indigenous knowledge to include the value that elders bring to the work at hand. Ultimately, the goal of the IJC is to protect the aquatic eco resources that we have along the border in compliance with the treaty. And that's just one example. I think the key in the partnership is inclusiveness. When you're in a position of power, you exercise that power to bring people into the fold and give people a voice who may not have that ability.
I just building off of that, when I mentioned inclusion of tribes, also ensuring that you're dealing with the appropriate people at the appropriate level, and talking to the tribe itself, because the tribe they have their policy position on certain issues, rather than, we see this, encounter this sometimes, where there's like NGOs or things like that, and not doing things intentionally, but partnering with individuals who do not speak on behalf of the entire tribe. So just ensuring that you're, working with the tribal leadership or their staff, because their staff are guided by the leadership's policy. And also, like, inclusion as a stakeholder, but also them being a part of the process, because tribes we're stewards of the resource, but we also understand the world that we live in. All of our tribes, we have farms, we have Yakama Nation farms, all of our, our Cryptic member tribes, they all have like their own energy development interests and things like that. And, having the farms and, recognizing irrigation needs and power needs and things like that. It doesn't have to be tribes versus everybody else, or like salmon versus energy or anything like that. It's us working together, focusing on our commonalities to achieve those goals. Because we partner with irrigators in the Yakama Basin, creating storage that helps in-stream flow, and the irrigators are advocating for salmon. So that these types of things, when you focus on your commonalities and create these lasting partnerships, is when you could achieve the greatest outcome.
Thank you. Focus on the commonalities to achieve the same goal. That's pretty powerful. As you can see, I think you are hearing a lot of the intricacies that are tied up in compensatory mitigation and environmental markets touch tribes, whether they be natural resources converting to tribal treaty resources in the ecological areas, in ecosystem areas supporting those tribal resources such as salmon, bison, whales, an array of different things, grasslands, desert, sagebrush, anything. All of that is a part of the same ecosystem and bringing uplift. So another question I would like to turn to the group as a whole is, what benefits do tribes see from being a part of the environmental space, or vice versa, particularly in restoration and markets? What benefits do you see either as a federal partner, as a nonprofit tribal organization, or a non-native nonprofit organization that can help uplift this sphere of environmental markets for tribes and for nonprofit entity, or for non-native entities as well?
I have to start. Oh, God. Gosh, well, I think I already mentioned a lot of the benefits, and I want to say that, you know, I don't want to focus on just the benefits to our company, because really the focus has to be and the benefit of the landscape that we're working on and the restoration project, because they have to be successful. And what I'm finding the biggest benefit is when you include tribes, they help sort of with that gamble or bet that you're doing the right thing long term. So for me, it's about ensuring the project success. So there are benefits, you know, from a company that I get a chance to meet a lot of wonderful people. That's great. But it really is the focus on the land and the projects, making sure they're successful, and having them as partners to me, I know is really helping me with my sort of hopeful plans on the restoration. So it's really new outside of the 106 process for us, 106 process for WES. But our company, again, is finding so many benefits now with their advice, with their help, that our projects are just getting better. And that's the whole point of all of this industry, is get projects better and finding a way to make sure that when we say we're going to do something, we do it, and then it's successful, and then it's taken care of in perpetuity. So for me, that's the biggest benefit I've found is the connection with them.
Okay, that's tough to follow, but you know, I've been thinking about being on this panel all week, and I really thought of this as much a learning opportunity as I am, you know, just sharing with you, because to be honest, like, you don't see a lot of tribes here, or, you know, there's just us really that are attending, because in my area, the mitigation banking and things like that isn't common practice. We do work with partners, TNC and several land trusts and things like that to create conservation easements and, you know, protecting and restoring lands. But this is kind of a different realm, and I'm really learning a lot. And so really it's just connecting, making those connections, I think is what's important, and kind of learning on both sides. So thank you.
You know, there's a few things I want to mention, and some of you have probably heard, you know, if you've met one Indian, you've met one Indian, and I, you know, I want to emphasize a little bit about the difference in the cultures within Indian country. You know, I've presented in front of dozens of tribal councils, and a tribe in the Northern Plains, their cultures and their beliefs may not be the same as a Pueblo tribe in the Southwest. It's certainly not the same as the Northwestern tribes or Alaskan Native corporations or East Coast. So I think it's important that be said while I have the talking feather here. But I want to your question, the benefits. If I could simmer it down to maybe one or two words and not be too long-winded: growth and longevity. And when I say growth, I mean growth in a larger term. Growth for the ecosystem, growth for the plants and the animals, and growth as humans. Those are the benefits I think we all receive. We're you know, as humans, we need to understand that we represent in a lot of ways the non-humans. You know, the plants and the animals that are out there, they need us to recognize that if we ignore them, and a lot of tribes and Indians would say, those are my cousins, right? That's my family. And so we need to respect that as if they were our family. Because without that level of inner growth and exterior growth that we're talking about here, there's longevity, and that's what the ecosystem needs. Beyond, I think Travis mentioned a few years or a handful of years or even 10 years, right? We need to think about what our grandchildren's grandchildren are going to receive from the decisions that we make and the connections we make. Indian country wants to work. They want to work with you, if I can speak generally about that. There's hundreds of millions of dollars being received by tribes through the bipartisan infrastructure law. And so they have the money and the capability of paying you. I don't know. I mean, many of you are consultants, and at the end of the day, you know, it's how can I help the environment and still get paid, quite frankly. Well, the tribes have that money and they need your expertise. And so I would say look inside yourself and look for that inner growth, and to reach out and communicate with individual Indians and work with them. To Danella's point, you may have to reach out more than once or twice, you know, because politics, you know, tribal leaders change on an annual basis. There might be a young natural resources director. There might be a political leader on tribal council that you worked with last year that's not there this year. So constant communication is what's required, I think, to benefit tribes to achieve that growth that we're talking about.
Along the same lines, first of all, and I think that the type of work we're all involved with, I believe this is a noble purpose. You know, ecosystem restoration, protecting the aquatic ecosystem health, that's about quality of life. And so I think all of the endeavors that we have in that area are worthwhile and rewarding. I think Travis was spot on with the involvement of Indigenous knowledge and peoples. We make these projects better, hands down. And I think looking forward, many of the work I think we do is backward looking. It's about damage that has been done, how we're correcting or attempting to correct that. But the challenges are going to get tougher going forward in our natural environment, and we're going to need everybody and all the wherewithal and knowledge to solve, I think, the challenges of the future. And so in some ways, this is make a friend before you need a friend. Build these relationships and partnerships and get experience in figuring out how to solve tough challenges now, so when we're confronted with even greater challenges in the future, we're going to be ready to take those on.
You know, and I'll say, with all of these projects going on, you know, $72 million for electrification, $120 million for 102 projects, there's a lot of room for involvement with the private sector and with philanthropy. I don't know how many NEPA contractors we're going to need. You know, hundreds, right? How many project managers are we going to need? Because a lot of times the tribes don't have the capacity to take those jobs on themselves. So, you know, for example, in the voluntary climate-driven relocation program, one tribe just recently hired a project manager, and this person with the expertise needed to do that is really driving is really making progress in this process. So I think you have a lot of opportunities, a lot of knowledge and skills to provide, and I think in terms of innovative technology, that's a key area. A lot of tribes in Alaska have generators run on oil or propane, right? What about solar? What about turbines in the river? There's all kinds of things that could be done in which private sector brings their own expertise and knowledge. So there's a lot of opportunity there.
Thank you, guys. So I want to start closing this session, and I have one specific question of each of my panelists. It is going to be rapid fire. Among the many things that we have heard today about partnerships, about tribal sovereignty, about making sure you have constant communication and good communication with tribes, and tribes having that good communication with you to achieve the same goal, find the commonalities on the same goals. Among the many pieces of advice that you could give and that have been given here today, if you had to choose 1, 2, or 3 pieces of advice that you could choose to give both tribes or non-tribal entities looking to partner in this space, what would they be?
Call me or email me, either way. No, reach out. I mean, I think we're all so busy. I've been trying to work with Tribal Nations Tech Center on a connection mechanism. Like, because I don't know everybody that's interested in my projects, but how do I connect correctly? So how do you do that? How do you make the connections? Is there some system or database that we can get together that I can look at and say, oh, here's my project, great. I know these people possibly are interested. And these are recognized and even non-recognized tribes. I want anybody that has an interest in making the project better have the ability to connect with us. So that's what I'm trying to do, is figure out how to connect more efficiently with people on projects.
All right. Yeah, I think, making the connection, one, and also being open-minded and thinking outside of the box on ways that we could partner and work together. And because it's, we all understand the environment is very complex, and there's a lot of overlap in things that you wouldn't even think of. Like I mentioned, irrigators advocating for salmon. That's, we didn't think we would see that in one of our basins, but and just understanding, empathizing, understanding what our natural resources mean to our people, like what Travis talked about. Like, I often get choked up all the time, and I apologize for that, because we're meeting with some people, and it's funny, I heard someone say, like, you really care a lot about salmon. And it was like, yeah, but it's more than just that. It's a part of our culture. It's the heart of our culture, and all of our natural resources are. And so taking that into consideration, how, we look at, we're a part of the environment. And so it's our, that protection and our care, our, love for our sacred resources, as a whole, and looking really comprehensively. And so one thing always affects another. And so, like I said, it takes that out of the box thinking to create these really great comprehensive plans and ideas.
Communication, outreach, tribal councils, I think those are just general terms that you should walk away with here. But I think if the question, if I heard it correctly, was what advice we can give. I'm going to throw some terms out there. Cautious fearlessness. Cautious fearlessness. All right, run with me on this. With a level of humility, okay, and respect for any Indian you meet, especially the elders. But don't forget the youth. They deserve some respect too. There's some IK in some young people that would blow your mind. And in my opinion, just because you're old doesn't mean you're wise. Some people think that with age comes wisdom, and yeah, I think generally you could probably say that, but not always. And so respect those that you're talking to, and so be cautious. More specifically, if I can get into the weeds, I know I'm not the last nor first person to say that at these types of conferences, but to get into the weeds here a little bit, I want to talk about some keystone species, and before we end, the bison, beaver, salmon, and I'll just stick with those three for now. What bison bring, and if you understand, and many of you do, what a keystone species is all about, the bison can help spread the native seeds, being ungulates that create beautiful little teardrop pools that seeds love to gather in and promote grasslands. Understanding that there's so much that can grow from bison being a keystone species. So if you anchor anything into the grasslands, anchor with bison. Beaver, I want to talk about real quick. Fire suppression, wetland management. Talk about the best stewards of the land. The beaver are fantastic, and I know there's opinions about beaver, but keep in mind that the indigenous knowledge out there supports these facts and supports what you do in your careers. And the salmon, of course. Danella has mentioned it a couple times, and the salmon are so important and as a keystone for the Northwest and Alaskan tribes. And the core foundational institutional block of what the ecosystem evolves from in the Northwest starts with salmon. My tribe specifically, if I can share this, we respected and revered the salmon so much that we put boards on our papooses' heads and tied them up so that it would point our heads so we looked more like salmon. And then when Lewis and Clark came over, they said that's probably doing some brain damage, so we stopped doing that. But nonetheless, we revered the salmon so much that we wanted to look like them. And so, you know, and the last thing I'll mention here is that, you know, we're all from a tribe. All of you are from a tribe. And I heard this once, and I want to share it with you, and I want to share it wide. You're from a tribe. You've just forgotten. Your lineage comes from a tribe somewhere, whether it was Africa, Europe, Asia, wherever it may have been. You were originally from a tribe. So keep that in mind. We all are cousins at the end of the day.
For me, this is an exercise in trust, and you know, collectively, and I'm coming from a federal perspective, always in the background is this broken trust environment that is, you know, ever present. But at the individual level, I think there are many opportunities to build trust, and that broader broken trust could take centuries, you know, to repair. But on the individual basis, working with tribes, my advice is first listen to understand, exercise humility, and at the same time acknowledge the pain, acknowledge the righteous anger that is present in tribal perspectives, and to be patient and invest the time. It takes time to build trusting relationships. It also takes time to deliver on these types of projects. Tribal governments have limited capacities in many instances, and many of the people who we work with have other jobs and other pressing responsibilities, and we've got to move at that speed of trust. I wouldn't be in the position to provide advice to tribes, but I think my request in working with tribes is that they would be willing to teach and take the time to teach about their culture, about their people, and then also that they would extend some grace to the people who are willing to show up and engage and try to advance projects or try to consult on a difficult issue, say a contentious regulatory permitting action. The people who are showing up, I think, do deserve grace, and through that grace, I think it can help fulfill that trust responsibility.
Okay, my three are again trust. You know, since we're all new to this, and you know, some people are more advanced than others. You know, you're actually setting a precedent on the relationship that you're building with those tribes, and you know, we want to start off on a good foot and you know and build on that. But you know, trust goes both ways. You know, them trusting you and then you trusting in them to follow their lead, and because they have a good idea of what needs to be done to begin with. Another thing to take into account is the tribal economy. We talk about key species. You know, the Native American is one of them. You know, if something's wrong, they're not going to be here. You know, and we deal with so much just within our area. You know, with fentanyl crisis, diabetes, and some of these issues. You know, it's not right. You know, where we're living at. So you know, we're struggling at that in that sense to survive too. And then also knowing who you're working with. You know, some of the funding from this might just go into the tribal coffers, and who knows where that goes. You know, a lot of tribes, it just kind of blends in somewhere. But the people that are actually practicing and doing these practices on the ground are the natural resource users, the producers. And, you know, for them not to be compensated for those practices is wrong, you know. So, and then also be aware of the different land status. You know, it's not all federal trust land. Some of them are broken up into allotments and some other land status. So, before you go into to partnership with the tribes, understand their land status. Thank you.
You know, my advice would be don't be afraid to work with tribes if you've never worked with tribes. And I can't tell you how many times over the course of my career I've heard people say, oh, I don't work with tribes, or that's not my area, and I don't know how to do it. You know, it's not scary, right? And if you need some advice, call the Bureau of Indian Affairs. Each tribe has their own agency superintendent. There are 12 BIA regions who are able to, you know, kind of help you make contact with a tribe, understand some of their issues, find out who the tribal president is, those kinds of things that you may have questions about. But really, just don't be afraid. It's something that's really needed right now. So thank you.
Land status. Ooh, you guys, we could do a whole nother 3 hours on that one. But no, I like, as you've heard, opportunities with tribes and indigenous nations, indigenous peoples are vast. They're there. They're not always projected as a compensatory mitigation project. Maybe it's just one piece of it, like the land management piece, the natural resource management piece, the science piece. Are you going to implement traditional ecological knowledge? Are you going to do co-stewardship or co-management? This panel was designed this year. We didn't go in depth about conservation easements and go down the rabbit hole of land management and tribal sovereignty and all these different things. But it was this year thought to give you some food for thought about the conversations you have, about the documents that you create. And I invite you to think about us, think about tribes, think creatively about these partnerships in this space, because as you've heard, these partnerships can be very successful, not only for the tribes, but for the non-tribal entities, for the federal side, and more importantly, for the planet. We have the same interest as you, although it doesn't look exactly the same, might be a little different. Like Travis mentioned, it's more, we want you to listen, we want access, we want these natural resources to survive because our treaty resources depend on it. So find the commonalities to achieve the same goal. Each project is going to be very unique. Each mitigation is very unique in their set of circumstances. And likewise, each tribe in your area is very unique in their views, their sovereignty, and how they restore their lands and their natural resources. So I would like to thank my panelists. I know I only left you 4 minutes for questions, but we will also be in the hallway. And thank you all for attending in this session today. So.
Thank you, Kelly Jorgensen with Compass Ecospatial. This should have been a main stage panel, really. I get emotional too, so pardon me. When I first came to this conference, I don't know, sometime in the mid-20 teens, my first thought when I got there was, where are the tribes? Because I work on the West Coast, and every conference opens with an invocation. And it was a glaring void. And I am thrilled that you are here filling that void. And before I cry, I'm going to stop.
Hi, thank you everyone for coming today. Wonderful panel. I'm a regulator. I'm chief of regulatory district in San Francisco, California. A lot of tribes in our area. But I cut my teeth on ecological restoration, hands in the ground, worked with Native Hawaiians, worked along the central coast of California with the Chumash, on some big restoration projects there. And but now my problem really, and I didn't come here looking for environmental market opportunities with the tribes, right? The opportunity here today for me was to connect, to hear your stories, and that's really it's been a great hour here to hear all that. But my challenge, and it's a humbling one, is volume, right? As a regulator, across the country we've got 40,000 actions coming in every year, and we've talked about that capacity at the tribal level and how are we to engage with that level of volume and not be stepping on anyone's toes and forcing our time frames on something where when you start a conversation and you want to develop a partnership, there shouldn't be a time window to that. And so but that's the world I work in. That's what drives my day-to-day operations for my team. And I just want to learn more on how we could be respectful and just, frankly, not step in it where we shouldn't be stepping in it. So if there's if any of the tribal members would like to, share some thoughts or any experiences, I'd love to hear, how we can do a better job as regulators.
So as a regulator, you're talking about like permitting and that whole process and everything? Yeah, it's kind of funny that you say that because we kind of see the same thing. It's like we think you guys take forever, So it's like we wanted to start this project last year, and we need to, yeah. So you kind of stumped me on that one because I didn't expect to hear that from you.
I think one quick thing. I'd said it early. If all of us just sort of understand the importance of early coordination, not consultation, like coordination, connecting early with the people that might be interested in the project is really helpful, and then that can help in the 106 sort of process for sure. I would say one of my early experiences, this was the River Cane situation, where we had the tribe writing letters to the Corps, but the Corps didn't have time to really go through all those. They actually thought that they were going to bother Westerfeld because it was complicated, and they didn't want to slow us up because it was a major road project we were providing mitigation for. And then when we got a call from someone outside of the Corps, it was a tech center guy, said, "Hey, do you guys want to talk to them about this River Cane thing?" I go, "Yeah, let's talk. Yeah, let's talk about it." But the Corps was trying to be polite on schedule and getting things done, and there was pressure on the road project, and they thought they were going to slow it all up, and just letting us have the conversation instead of having the Corps have to manage that was really helpful. So not saying you weren't useful, but it was nice to just have us a direct conversation, and then we ended up with a much better project.
I would say be transparent. Be transparent about what the process is. Right? This step takes this long. We expect you, tribe, to provide these documents. If you lay it out and set your expectations about how long this is actually going to take, that goes a long way, I think, to help.
I'll just highlight, when I was doing research with the Environmental Policy Innovation Center about compensatory mitigation and tribal conclusion, I identified that there are 3 relationships in this sphere that essentially exists. And the first one is the tribes to the natural resources and how they view it. And the second is the relationship with the tribe and the regulators and the nonprofit, the non-native entities, and how their relationship works. And the third is those first 2 versus the process, and kind of how they view that and see that and how they work cohesively together. So early is better in these kinds of things, specifically for tribes. We talked about the turnover and tribal council and different things that can happen. I know Justice Rhodes had mentioned that, and not all councils, there's a lot of turnover. So not, the second council, the first council that you were working with might not have the same capacity or even knowledge of what was going on with you. So constant early communication is key. But keep those 3 relationships in mind, because, essentially working to uplift the planet and uplift ecosystem restoration, compensatory mitigation, in whatever sphere it is, whether or not you're being compensated in a bank or not, is going to require those relationships. And that's just the reality of what the regime is. So, but
May I add to that? When I hear volume, I hear workload, right? I hear I need more people. I need, there's a person power issue that I have here. If I've got 40,000 permits, that's a big volume. So who do I work with, right? How can I pull other people in? You may not be able to have more staff or hire more consultants, but or get more full-time employees or whatever it might be. But I think one thing that is important to share here is that we've all heard of silos, right? We know the silos, and I like to use the term tubes of excellence, right? So in the interior, if we call each bureau a tube of excellence, right? I mean, everybody wants to think they're the best. So let me break that down for you real quick, right? So Bureau of Land Management, Bureau of Indian Affairs, National Park Service, Fish and Wildlife Service, these are bureaus within the interior, right? So each one of these bureaus, they may not communicate very well with each other. It might take you to reach out, but who do you reach to? I think to the point of like getting traction here, we talked about communication. Well, who do I talk to, right? there's tribal liaison officers that you may not know of. So the Bureau of Land Management has tribal liaison officers. The Fish and Wildlife Service within the Interior have tribal liaison officers. National Park Service has tribal liaison officers. And quite frankly, these tribal liaison officers may not talk to each other, but it may take you reaching out to this tribal liaison officer within these tubes of excellence to communicate with each other with your tribe or your project to help you move things forward. So when I hear you say you've got this volume, you need people, there are people out there to help. And sometimes it just takes a panel or somebody like me telling you, hey, there's a tribal liaison officer out there, and you didn't know that, but you wouldn't have known it if I didn't mention it today. So I think that there's more outreach that can happen, and the Office of Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs is certainly there to help as well. And so to Maria's point, don't be scared to reach out consistently and often and continue to be that that squeaky wheel if you need to be. But there are resources out there to help alleviate that volume, along with the tribes, to like what Danella was telling, but I'm speaking from the federal side at this point.
Alrighty. No more questions? Okay, 2 more questions.
Perfect. It's already on. I don't have to figure out the technology. Good morning. I'm Laura Shively. I work with the Sacramento District of the Corps out in California as well. A few of you had mentioned, funding being available for tribes to, engage with their interests. I work primarily in mitigation banking, and I guess the question I had, as we as a district are kind of developing our tribal communication plans for reviewing banks and how we're going to try and improve our process for that engagement. How do we find out more about opportunities if tribes wanted to access, maybe it's grant funding or other funds that they might be able to use to participate in the process that might be outside of our agency? And this might be a really broad question, and I'm happy to talk about it with somebody later if you're interested.
This is probably a longer conversation. Let's meet in the hallway. But there are resources, right? I mean, conservation.org, I believe, right, for resources for tribes to look for grant funding. I would mention NIFWF as well, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. Their website can show you resources where tribes have successfully received bill funding for projects. And some of these are avenues to show you where the projects are around the country. But we can get in depth with that conversation in the hallway if you'd like.
And I'll just mention quickly, there's been a recent effort to try to identify all of the grants, right, available throughout the country through all the agencies, which is a monumental task. But, there are some resources which I can provide you. If you look online, right, FEMA has a really good library that's available to the public where you can identify the type of grant that you're looking for. It'll identify the agency, the parameters of it, but there are a lot of things out there.
We should probably, another question. Yeah.
I had one question. I just was going to comment. Thank you all for being here. I love that. The comment on the main stage, fully agree. I think that I've been attending as much as possible when I come to conferences. There's been, I know, Mariah, you've been on a lot of panels, and I've met you before. And we'll see some of you again at the National Stream Conference in June. There's also a great session coming in June 26th or 24th through 28th, sometime. Check your calendars. But my comment was, I love a lot of what I'm hearing. That I feel like tribes have really stepped forward, and they have led in this connection. And coming forward, our mindset on land and ownership or control of land or stewardship is completely different. We all work, our jobs are stewardship. That's our business. But livelihood is stewardship as well, and can be. And I think making those connections, hugely important. But for us to come out and peel back the layers, we are all ancestors, descendants of tribes. And peeling back those layers and finding ourselves and our connections. It's we talk about connections with landscape and connections with other people. I feel inspired by a lot of what I hear to find connections within myself, of ourselves. You know, we live in these worlds that kind of, we're a product of our environment. So I just feel inspired and by the panel and by everyone attending, and just want to say thank you for a good session, and I look forward to seeing some of you and more at the next stream conference in June.
Hey, quick, that's awesome. I know we're kind of getting rushed out here, but I just wanted to thank you all for doing the amazing work you're doing. This is tough stuff, but it is generational work. So I know, don't be impatient or try not to be impatient. This is really important stuff. So thank you guys so much for the work you guys are doing in all your sort of areas.
Thank you, guys. Yes, I will also be moderating that panel at Stream Restoration Conference in June, so I will see you there. And yes, thank you all for attending, and another round of applause for my panelists, please.